Welcome back, y'all, to another episode of Fighting Matters. I'm Jeff Shaw. I'm joined by Steve Kwan, Jesse Walker, and our special guest today is a dear friend of mine, Jiu-Jitsu black belt, polymath, educator, successful pro MMA fighter with 35 plus pro MMA fights, and activist against gender-based violence, among the many things I could say about D'Juan Owens. D'Juan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you all.
So let's talk about your work against gender-based violence. When did you start that work? And obviously I want to talk about your work in Africa, but you do this all over the place. I know you've been to Senegal, Nigeria, Uganda, various other places. Where did the inspiration from this work come from, and when did you start doing it?
Well, I'll say this: the inception of my interest in learning about gender-based violence and intimate partner violence was kind of through tragedy. One of my cousins, Cynthia, in another life, when I was in the Marine Corps, I was about 18. I was on a ship called the Kearsarge. So we're on the water, and I got called into the colonel's office, which is that just doesn't happen. And I found out that I had a death in the family. My cousin, Thea, she was a victim of intimate partner violence, and it was a murder suicide. So it was a situation where they had broken up, and he did the age old, hey, like, can I just see you one more time type thing. And then she agreed to meet him. He he yeah, he shot her, then he shot himself. So at that point, because I was very young, I believe I was 18, I was familiar with domestic violence. You hear it, but I didn't understand gender-based violence or intimate partner violence as a concept. Yes. So I started learning a bit more about it just through uh tragedy. Then it kind of was just something that I just a subject. There was no plan, to do any work. So, and then over time, your life just keeps going. And so there was no connection. Then when I started training martial arts, but the only thing I wanted to do was fight. I was like, oh, a fighter. I didn't see myself as a martial artist. I didn't even understand the concept of being a martial artist. I just thought of myself as a fighter, a prize fighter, want to, be in the UFC. And then one of my older jujitsu coaches, Jake Whitfield, our man, the black belt. I would see him and another black belt who I have a lot of respect for, Roy Marsh, doing these self-defense techniques sometimes. So as a fighter, I'm like, man, why they, these guys know how to fight? Why are they doing this self-defense stuff? It doesn't make any sense, because as they're similar to like the instruction of like a kata. So I just didn't understand it, right? But then I remember I was in Uganda at one point supporting a buddy of mine who had a break organization called BPU, Breakdance Project Uganda. And in another life, I was a b-boy, I was a breakdancer as well. So when a lot of the local kickboxers, because kickboxing is very popular in Uganda, found out that a pro fighter was there, they asked, could I train? Because I do a seminar, teach some jujitsu. So I'm there teaching the MMA seminar, and a woman came to the seminar who does not train, and she said, could you teach me, some techniques to teach my daughter? And I, someone's translating for me, and I remember thinking like wait, what? Like, well, and I remember thinking, like, okay, well, anything that I teach you, one, you're not going to remember it. So how about I'll just bring her tomorrow. So in my mind, I'm just going to do a self defense seminar. At this point, I'm probably like, I believe it was a blue belt, jujitsu, probably purple belt level. I just never put a gi on. But I knew some basic things. I felt, you know, at that time, I thought I could teach a self defense seminar. So just by there was no social media advertising, there was nothing. I just told one person, "Hey, bring your daughter. I'm gonna show y'all some stuff." I go back to this dojo. It was a Korean guy, very cool elder who he had a taekwondo studio, but he was just allowing us to use it for whatever. Um, so I came back the next day, and I yeah, I'm serious. There's probably about 60 people there. 60 people there. So I teach this seminar. My mom about, okay, it's gonna be an hour and a half, 2 hours. Y'all, I'm there for like 4 damn hours. Can you curse on this joint?
Yes, of course.
Okay, my bad, y'all. So, yo, I'm there for like 4 hours, right? And it was like it was it was amazing. Like the fighters came, so they're kind of like backing up some of the things I'm saying. So then I remember, I kind of thought back to some of the things I learned about intimate partner violence, gender-based violence prevention. Tapped into some of the sociology classes I'd taken, and I started thinking about like where these fighters kind of sit on this kind of social hierarchy. Right, they're the cool guys, they're the popular guys. So if we're equating masculinity with protecting, you know what I mean, with peer accountability, then you see what I'm saying. So now that I have these guys kind of buying into it, and so in going home that day, well, to where I was standing there, I was like, man, this is really something. Maybe I could do another one. Taught two more seminars. It went well. That was my first time. It was 2015, when I went to Uganda. So then when on the flight back home, long ass flight, I remember thinking like, I want to learn more about teaching self defense. Educate myself more on intimate partner violence, gender based violence prevention. So then it kind of just became something where a lot of these separate parts of me kind of combined, and that was the first time I saw martial arts as a tool, right? Because like I said, I'm young at that point. I think I was 30, so the only thing I was thinking about, like martial arts, whether it's jujitsu, um, kickboxing, it's just a means to an end to win to fight. But then I'm like, well, in the grand scheme of things, what am I doing? I'm entertaining people. I'm fighting for money. I ain't even making no money. I'm actually losing money. Y'all know, don't get me started. Right. So what am I doing? But when I saw like the kind of the power, that martial arts do, not only because you're not just showing someone something, you're giving them something, right? You're teaching them, and also I see the confidence growing. So then I got a little bit better at like the structure of a seminar, right? Okay, this is what you teach. First, you need to build up their confidence through their competence. So teach us technique like a basic grip break. Also, don't so then I kind of researched a lot of these Gracie self-defense videos. No disrespect, but I got some, what I saw was in certain types of self-defense seminars, it was kind of decontextual. There was no context. There was just these techniques in isolation, and the ultimate like uh the point was like, hey, train jujitsu. Train jujitsu, you don't got to worry about nothing, right? So, and I had also heard some kind of victim blaming language too. You know what I mean? Like, if she would have trained, don't get me started. So then I was okay. We had to talk about the social context in which the violence takes place. Okay. Then then as with anything else, you teach more and you just get better at it. And I just got better at like teaching the seminars, learning like, okay, I need to throw some jokes in right here. So you kind of got your kind of your premeditated jokes. Then you got your little freestyle shit. So you mix it in and it just becomes a fun type thing. Then I'm going way over the first question, man. The question was, how did you get into it? So my bad. but since I'm on a roll now,
Yeah.
quick segue. So I got invited to teach in Senegal. I went to one African country, right? So here's my young and naive, like, oh, I taught in Uganda. So I taught in Africa. I'm teaching in Africa again, right? Big ass continent, right? Here's stateside, these lines like a different state. So what? It don't matter if you're teaching in the Midwest, the North, Cali, whatever. Same language, might be a little bit of different slang, but like I didn't it didn't hit me that like, no, D'Juan, this is another damn country. The mores, the folkways, everything is different. Even the examples that you'll type of use, the examples that you'll use are very different. You can say something that doesn't mean anything in another place. So just, through that teaching different places, I just got better at it. I got more confident. And then as with anything, when you get better at something, you start taking more pride in it. It kind of becomes a part of your identity, and then you're more eager to learn, and your identity is kind of reaffirmed by how people are responding to what you're doing. So I just kind of fell in love with it, man. So yeah.
Let's talk about the gender aspect that you brought up, where you had, at first, we sort of stereotype fighter gyms as mostly male spaces. And then you
Yeah.
have this mom and her daughter. And, and one of the things that I really respect and admire about the work that you do is you don't just teach women to defend themselves, because although that's necessary, important, empowering, there can be victim blaming there. Like, well, if you didn't learn to fight, And I think some of the most important stuff that you do and that we can do as martial artists is teach young men and give them positive examples of masculinity, teach them about consent, teach them about ways to sort of demand side as opposed to supply side
Yeah.
self-defense. I'm just wondering if you could speak on that a little bit about that importance.
Yeah, no, I would love to. So I, again, through my pre-martial arts, education and like, taking some gender studies classes and, being being like one of two two men in the gender studies classes, and which we had probably had about maybe 20 people in the class. We got slapped up a lot. There was a lot of hard lessons, a lot of like, that we needed to hear, that we need to learn. And it's actually a good thing that the numbers were kind of skewed the way they were, because naturally sometimes, man, we want to dominate the conversation. You know what I mean? Well, I want to say natural, I'll say the way we're socialized to take up space. Let me say that. So yeah. I think at the point that I started teaching the seminars, in researching, I realized, like, society in general, we just victim blame. We just victim blame. But then in learning more about that, let me say this, right? This is not to give a pass to or justify victim blaming. So I was talking about this concept, the just world fallacy. Like, well, like everyone who victim blames, even though it's ignorant, it's not always malicious. If people can place at least some of the blame on the victim, now it absolves, like, not only absolve them, but it makes people who they love or themselves, in their mind, less likely for it to happen. Oh, that won't happen to me because I won't wear this thing. That won't happen to my daughter because she won't go to this place at this time. It's like the more innocent the victim is, the scarier it is to people. So yeah, a lot of times when people are victim blaming, even though it's ignorant, it's not always malicious, right? And in that, the rationale is a justification for why harm won't happen to them or someone they love. So if someone says, we find out that something happened to someone who's been a victim of gender-based violence, and they say, oh, well, what did she have on, or where was she at, what was his time? The more innocent the person is, the scarier it is to them. Like, it's an affront to the idea that the world is just, and bad things happen because sometimes we're not light on our feet, instead of realize, like, no, we're vulnerable. People and women, people who are not men, are most vulnerable. And that's a scary thing to admit. And instead of just admitting that and saying, okay, what can we do about that, there's a desire to place at least some of the blame on the victim. So almost to say that, well, this won't happen, this would not have happened had you not done this, which also says this won't happen to me or my daughter or my friend or my, whoever. So yeah, so we see that. So after learning, like, that's just kind of baked into culture, and that's not an indictment on any, but this is global, this is everywhere. You look at the news, the newspaper, when they report a crime, even the line of questioning. If someone is harmed and they have to go to the police station and file a report, the line of damn questioning, you know what I mean, is inherently victim blamey, if you
Well,
will.
what were you doing? Right?
Right. Why were you there? You know what I mean? Well,
Yeah,
you didn't
why did
tell
this
me.
happen to you and not anybody else, right?
You
It's
understand.
classic.
You understand. So in seeing that, I realized, okay, we have to come up with more tools and kind of buy in. And then, like, in looking at, remembering that class I told you about, my kind of positionality, being a able-bodied heterosexual male. Well, this is how I'm presenting anyway, right? This is what someone's gonna assume. So, and the privilege that comes with that. And I know a lot of times when people think privilege, that, it's easy for us to think about things that, we can do or have access to. But sometimes, privilege is shit that you just don't have to think about. There's certain things I just don't have to think about. It doesn't mean I don't care. I just don't think about it. I told you I was just cornering, my homie. When I went to the venue, I don't know if they had wheelchair access. I cared, but I just wasn't thinking about it. I don't know if they had a braille sign outside, because it's just not, you know what I'm saying? So immediate in my life. So if I use that example, sometimes that can help us kind of understand the ways we benefit, privileges that we have without thinking about it. So in noticing that, I'm like, all right, how can we kind of use this, position that we have to support people who are oppressed, and from a gender perspective, and also realizing, like, okay, also we have an obligation, almost like a moral mandate, because we benefit from the oppression of people who are not men. So I must do something. And the last thing I'll say on that, when I say all men, benefit from gender-based violence, it doesn't feel good to say, because it can almost feel like, well, I don't do this, I don't do that. Yeah, but because a lot of people do, the fact that you don't, you're almost put on this pedestal. You know what I mean? Because you're a good man. Because you're not as bad of a man as society allows you to be. You know what I mean? You ain't even got to be good. Just don't be the worst. Right? It's a conundrum. It's some real accountability, and it's tough to even talk about, but it's real.
Yeah, one of the things that we just talked about was the J-Rod incident. People, and one of the things I respected about Craig Jones's response, which we talked about in the last episode, is that people were like, "Oh, Craig, you handled this so good," and he said, "Look, don't hold me up as an example. I'm far from perfect, and I did what feels like the bare minimum, and yet there's this low bar to clear." So, Steve,
Yeah.
Jesse, I know you had some questions for D'Juan.
Yeah, I can maybe go first. The first thing I'd like to do is maybe hear you expand on things like privilege and oppression, right? For some people, they get a very visceral reaction to those words, right? Because when you hear privilege, you think, I think a lot of people assume that means you're a multimillionaire and you're in a mansion eating caviar somewhere, but that doesn't really mean what we're talking about here. We're
Right.
talking about whether you realize it or not, you just have some advantages. Maybe they're not huge advantages, but they're things, like you said, you don't have to think about. I mean, I can share a personal example that I went through. I'm a small, unintimidating Asian Canadian software engineer. I'm not particularly intimidating. I had never in my life had issues trying to cross the border, never been a problem, until one day when I went down to Pans in the States with two Filipino friends of mine. They were just like big muscular guys, shaved heads. They look like jiu-jitsu guys. And like before a word was spoken, a half dozen cops with like 3 dogs come out and rip our car apart. And it's like, we didn't even say anything. And that's kind of when I realized, okay, their privilege is a real thing, right? Like my ability to just wander across the border and not worry about that happening, that's a privilege. That doesn't mean I'm super rich and I'm balling, or anything like that, but it means that I have silent advantages that I may not even see. I'd love to hear you maybe address that, because I know that in this day and age, when the political climate is so charged, when you say things like privilege or oppression, people are immediately going to start saying, well, that's woke, that's CRT, and they're going to shut it down. And I think when we do that, we risk closing the conversations that allow us to really help women in the sport, right? I mean, that's ultimately what we're trying to do here. If we really believe jiu-jitsu is a great self-defense art, we need to acknowledge that part of the problem is many of us come in from a perspective of privilege, and we may not understand what it's like.
Yeah, you summed it up well. I can expound on it a bit, but that was perfect. I think that, you know what, I'll put it like this. We've all, most of us have played video games when we were young, right? So you got a game that's on, let's say, very easy.
When we were young.
Well, yeah. I also realized that could be a little, no disrespect to my gamers out there.
Yeah, when you say when you were young,
ago?
You're like, what do you mean we were young? What do you mean? How young do you mean? Okay. So we've all played video games, right? I remember when I was young, man. There was this game called Gradius. It was like this spaceship game, and y'all, this shit was freaking hard, yo. But here's an example. So they had a mode, not just easy. The game was so hard that they didn't just have an easy mode. They had a very easy. Then they had easy. Then they had normal. Then they had hard. Then they had very hard. You can die on easy. You can die on normal. Just because it's easy or normal, it doesn't mean that you're gonna beat the game. But let's say if you're a spaceship, you're coming out, you shoot the other ship, the enemy ship, and it explodes. You put the game on very hard. When you shoot the ship, it explodes and splits into more. So killing them creates more problems, right? So the thing is, like, I'm using examples like, if I am situated on this kind of social hierarchy in a way, that doesn't mean that that I won't have any problems. It's just that there are significant, my path is just easier. And the thing is, there's also these weird variables that come into play as well too, where like I can be, let's say, these kind of markers that we all kind of, these delineations. I'm a, like I said, a black, able-bodied, heterosexual male. Obviously, we live in a, you know, a global system of various types of oppression. One in this country, white supremacy. So someone could say like, but that said, as a black male, in a weird way, I benefited more from being black in certain spaces than I would have it had I not been black, regardless of what the race, even if it was white, because of the assumptions that someone would have based off of that. So when they're pleasantly surprised, it's like in a way I'm almost rewarded, right? It's this real niche kind of. I don't want to get too you know, I don't want to get too abstract, right? But I'll say that, you know, it's not always this like fine line. I think that a lot of times when people are told that they are privileged, you know, it feels like an attack on their accomplishments. Right? It feels like you know, like the things that they have they didn't earn. And the thing is, anybody, most of us that are born in America, especially if we're American citizens, regardless of the ethnicity, we're very privileged. You know what I mean? When people say, "Oh, I'll work hard for this," yeah, most of the world works freaking hard, but we see, I'll say, a good amount of the profits from our work in this country, and that's not because of, you know, anything great about us as individuals. We just live in a country that has overwhelming military might. We can kind of set up these kind of economic imbalances, you know, so to speak. So I mean, it's a lot, right? It's hard to talk about it without talking about so much. But I'll say this: anyone ever feels that um being told that they have any a certain privilege is an indictment on them, right? As we research and learn about systems of oppression and how they're not always, it's not just interpersonal conflict, right? What on the basis of race, gender, or sexuality. It's not about someone calling you a certain name. People always talk about implicit bias, but it's also structural things as well, you know. And we're all, it's in all of us, even members of oppressed communities. You know what I mean? It's just what it is. This is how we're, you know, we're socialized. And the more we learn about it, I'll tell you this: it's not a scary. It's freeing. You know, it's liberating. You know, one of my favorite scholars, Paulo, the late great Paulo Freire, he said, the clearer my the more knowledge I have, the clearer my view of the world becomes, you know, and it's so true.
Yep. Well said. Well said. And I've actually been trying to figure out a way to shoehorn this into my jiu-jitsu podcast for a long time, but I haven't been able to figure out the slant. But you just touched on it beautifully. People get very confused about the difference between individual issues and systemic issues. And so people often push back on things and say, well, maybe there's this systemic thing, but I shouldn't have to do anything about it because I didn't do anything. I mean, there's a difference, right? If there are systemic biases in our society, that doesn't mean that you necessarily are at fault or did anything wrong. But we still have to acknowledge that those biases exist. And if we want to live in a just society, we should put in place a good faith effort to improve things and to get to a more level playing field. That's one of my frustrations with the dialogue these days, where it just comes across like people are saying, well, I didn't personally exploit this class of people, so therefore we should do nothing. And I think there's got to be a middle ground where we can acknowledge, look, I mean, people might not be guilty of having privilege. It's not their fault, but we should still make a good faith effort to try to make it a level playing field for everyone, which I think is kind of what you're getting at.
Well,
Yeah, we benefit from the oppression, whether we feel like we played a role in its inception or even a role in maintaining it. The structures set up is so crystallized that you can go about your everyday business of your everyday life and maintain a system that's already in place, but not because you're not actively working to dismantle it.
just because it's not your fault doesn't mean it's not your responsibility. And if we're interested in being moral actors that are making the world a better place, as opposed to letting the systems of oppression just continue, it's our responsibility to do that, especially for those of us that fall into the more privileged identities.
So this concept of privilege is actually something that I talk a lot about when I do self-defense seminars, because at least contextually in the US, there's always a big concern about my defense, my response as someone who's defending myself. What am I? What are my legal liabilities and responsibilities? And my first response is like, it depends, right?
Right.
Because of what I do for a living, I can't get away with the same things that my brother, who is a film editor in Brooklyn, can get away with, right? That's privilege. I can probably get away with things that you can't get away with, D'Juan, right? Because of the color of our skin. My wife can probably get away with things that I can't get away with because of our gender. And talking about that in that perspective seems to be a lot more impactful for people, because it doesn't feel like it's blaming or, like you said, an indictment. But people understand it in those terms. As soon as I start saying it like that, they're like, oh, holy shit, you're right. Like, all those little things actually do impact what we can get away with in terms of our ability and our legal ability to defend ourselves.
That's right. That's right. I think starting with yourself, like you said, it works really well. Like whenever we're kind of teaching or just explaining something to someone, using yourself as an example, like, and it could seem kind of generic or not, but no, it's real. It's still really effective. I think people because now you're not kind of finger wagging. You're not saying it's just them. They're saying like, hey, I too, you know, benefit from this. Yeah, that seems to work well.
Want to dig into the specifics of kind of the psychology of self-defense here, D'Juan, because I think this might be something you're very, very apt to speak on here. All of us who have trained jiu-jitsu understand, I think, that in terms of like the techniques, there are a lot of public misconceptions about what's effective from a self-defense perspective, right? I mean, there are many people who will sell like a women's self-defense seminar, and the idea is you go for a weekend and they'll take some dude and they'll like cover him with protective gear and you practice your groin strikes on him, and after a weekend you're quote unquote done. And all of us who've trained martial arts for a long time, I think we understand that that's not really the greatest way to teach people self-defense. I mean, first and foremost, because you're not going to get good at anything if you only train for a few days. But also, if anything, it might equip people with a sense of false confidence, because they're training a system that isn't really effective. They're not training it long enough to actually get good at it. I think for people who train martial arts, that statement is non-controversial. I think we all know that is the case. However, there is also this aspect of situational self-defense, which people in jiu-jitsu, I think, are often very misinformed of. And you touched on this earlier. If you listen to all of the people, like all of the dudes who are trying to sell women's self-defense courses in jiu-jitsu, they always sell them like under the assumption that we need to teach women to protect themselves in case they ever wander into a dark alley and they get assaulted by a stranger, right? Like jiu-jitsu coaches have this like weird, like fucking fantasy about like, these crazy anonymous strangers wearing masks who are just going to assault us all the time. But you touched on this. My understanding is that the majority of times a woman gets assaulted, it's not a stranger. It's someone that they know, sometimes someone that they know very intimately. And I'd love to hear you maybe expand on that, because I have friends who have been sexually assaulted in jiu-jitsu, and oftentimes it's someone that they know and they were very close to. And the thing that they told me was no amount of self-defense would have prepared them, because they were so shocked at the betrayal. In the moment, they didn't feel like they could respond effectively anyway.
Yeah, I'm so glad you touched on that point. I mean, this is something that we're growing up in this kind of this myth that like somebody in the bushes just jumping out, ha ha,
The
gotcha. Like
boogeyman.
it's just not true. It's almost always someone they know because of the familiarity. A predator wants what they consider to be an easy target, right? And it's not often this kind of hardcore. I'll say it's more often coercive than physically forcible. You understand? Which is still force, right? It's still, there's an array of tactics. Manipulation, guilt tripping, you know, um, kind of shaming in certain ways too, um, and also without clear boundaries, because like you said, these are people that are usually in, there's some social connection. Maybe they're in the same social circle. Maybe they work together. Maybe they're family. Maybe they're something. So now it's like this web of like peers, like people that they both know or are beholden to. So now what those people's opinions of it, you know, that kind of plays into everything as well too, unfortunately. I think that you know, when we talk about peer accountability, you know, this is also people holding people that they know accountable from the what they know happens. These predators, people who do predatory shit, let me say that, I don't want to say predators like they just exist. These are people who live amongst us, that they're our homies, our family members, our, you know, everywhere. I think that there's this contradiction that comes sometimes where people, it's almost easier if if they can kind of make a caricature of people who are harmful, right? I mean, we've seen it in the jiu-jitsu community. Someone is very prominent, maybe they will be like a legend or something like that, and you got a bunch of jokers out here who don't even know them. They don't even know this damn person because this person got a damn move named after them, or you know, or because they're so protective of the um you know, jujitsu. I'll say as a culture, as an entity, that they wouldn't want something to be an indictment on that. That they protect a predator in defense of that thing, which is also in protection of themselves, right? Because of their association with it. Is, you know, that happens very often. I think, you know, even with, you know, it's hard also when someone that we know and what we know of this person doesn't match what people hear. And it's really ignorant. People say, well, they never said that to me. Well, how would he molest you? You know, you're 39. You know, you're both 42. You're homies. So of course, what this person is doing and saying to you ain't the same as they saying to somebody who's 13 in the damn gym, right? And I think, like, you know, on the accountability tip from a cultural perspective, this is everywhere. You know, we see that a lot of times. You know, in the family, right? We see that in the social institutions. So I'm not just using jujitsu. We can take it to the church, masjid, the mosque, anywhere, the synagogue. You know, we see these type of things that happen in families, and it's like, well, damn, it's hard to confront this person who is in this kind of, because again, we're going back to these bullshit hierarchies, right? So it's easier for people to tell the person who was harmed how to feel or how to cope instead of holding the other person accountable. And I'll say this, that failure is just as impactful, and honestly, that enables, you know, we wouldn't have the problems with you know, intimate partner violence, domestic violence, you know, any type of sexual violence, molestation, if there was not such a culture of enablers and honestly cowards. You know what I mean? If there was like some real accountability, you're never going to stop certain individuals for doing something, but there's no accountability. There's a lot of protection there. There's a lot of victim blaming, and there's a lot of, like, y'all ever see situations where, let's say you got one person, it don't have to be sexual violence, any type of harm. One person is clearly the aggressor, right? And then someone who's clearly being harmed. It's not like equal force. And then someone who's playing the mediator is like, hey, y'all need to stop. What do y'all do? It's y'all, right? It's like, what the fuck you mean y'all? This person is doing the thing. This person is doing, what do you mean y'all? But that's that cowardice. So that is so normalized. You know what I mean? We live in a just a victim blaming, cowardly culture. And I think yeah. I hope yeah, I want to stay on topic, but that's just so, it's just so frustrating.
Well, I think it's important to understand that I think it is very related here. This fucking both sides fallacy, where every time something like this happens and you've got two conflicting sides of an argument, there's always going to be the person who takes the easy way out, which is to say, well, let's take a look at both sides. What's her side of the story? What's his side of the story? And that's not a bad approach for relatively mundane things in life, but sometimes one side is just right and the other side is just fucking wrong, and that's just the way that it is. And you don't want to be playing that both sides thing when it's completely cut and dry that one of these people did a bad thing. And I see this a lot, especially with women in jiu-jitsu. Also, trans people in jiu-jitsu get the same thing, where there will immediately be assumptions made about them before any facts are shared. I mean, I've seen this many times where there will be some story of sexual abuse happening in some gym. And before people know anything about the case, and before they even know who the alleged victim is, or even what was being accused, there will be some fucker in the comments who posts something like, well, we got to learn more because, women, they make up things and, you can't always trust them and false accusations happen. And, what was she doing? Do we really know that she didn't want it? Before even knowing any details, they just default to that. And I find that's an interesting thing to default to, because we know that statistically speaking, the vast majority of allegations are not false, right? So it's interesting that people just default to that. That is by far the least likely scenario. They just default to, oh, well, what did she do to deserve this? It kind of reminds me of conspiracy theories where people will jump to the most unrealistic thing possible and they're ignoring the very obvious explanation, but they just default to this kind of crazy drawn out thing that conforms to what they want to be true. And I think that's kind of what you're saying here.
Yeah, I think sometimes the most obvious to us, most obvious, but also likely thing, it requires something, right? It requires something of somebody. Hey, you might have to hold somebody accountable. You might have to cut someone off. You might have to do something. But if this other thing doesn't require anything, I could just stay in this kind of like this purgatory of like, I don't know. but if we say no, if we draw this hard line, then you have to stand up for something, and when you stand up for something, when you're on principle, yeah, it's gonna come with some level of sacrifice, even if it means being alienated from your social circle. Which, I mean, so what? You shouldn't prioritize them anyway. But often, I'm using the word sacrifice so loosely, right? Because often that's all it is. That's, oh well, I don't want people to think this about me. I don't want them to think that I'm siding, with this person. Matter of fact, I'm not the source of ridicule, and I want to stay on the in crowd. I just got cool, damn it. I wasn't cool when I was young. I just got cool, and now I'm doing jiu-jitsu. You're not about to mess me up and have me on the outs and have them talking about me. I'm clowning a bit, but this is what it is. It reminds me of like how you're young, and like, let's say is a bully, and you know bullies messing with you, talking shit, clowning you, and everybody laughing. And instead of approaching that bully, someone looks at the smallest person laughing. Man, what are you laughing at? What are you laughing at? Right? Because they want, like, okay, let me some misplaced aggression, right? Let me focus on this small thing here, so I'm not. I mean, it's regardless of what, it just boils down to cowardice. Now that I think about it, like, it all kind of funnels down to being a coward. And I think that a lot of times, I say that and it can sound, harsh, but I'm not talking about um, someone's ability to do certain things. I mean just an inability to take a stand and stop sitting on the damn fence. You know what I mean? And a lot of times people will sit on the fence until the majority pick a side. Then they'll go. It's like, hey, yo, what are we supposed to think about this? What are we supposed to feel about this? It's so hard, man. There's so many examples I want to use, but I'll say this. There was a gym. There was a gym down in Florida, real big jiu-jitsu gym, fight team. I'm being really real silly saying fight team because that's actually part of the name. But there was and they were harboring somebody who was known to be a sex offender. Now, he had some big name jiu-jitsu cats in there. One of my real close homies, was in like an affiliate gym down there, right? So what was at stake, right? Now, unfortunately, the gym name was at stake. We seen that again with another really prominent jiu-jitsu gym in the Maryland area. The gym name is at stake. So now people are more focused on prioritizing protecting that gym name, than justice, than accountability. And I'm just, not just to single them out, but shit, I don't care. I'll say those two. But we see that whether it's institutions, whether it's our social circle, whether it's anything, I need to protect this thing, if not only protection of myself, protection of my social circle, or in protection of this thing that I like because I want it to be the same. That's a sad thing, right? Sometimes it's like, damn, if I acknowledge this, that means this thing will never be the same. I can't look at this person the same way. I can never be, our relationship can never be what it was. So it's easier for me to just deny this shit or just do this kind of contrarian or perpetual devil's advocate. You always see that. Or what, like you said, that what about this? What about that? It's yeah. Yeah.
I feel like that kind of moral cowardice is much more common in jiu-jitsu than physical cowardice.
Mm,
People are willing to throw down over the smallest things, but not willing to take a stand over the biggest things.
Well, which is funny, right? Because if you really wanted to protect this thing that we love so much, we'd be doing our damnedest to get these bad actors out of there. But for whatever reason, that doesn't feel like the easy thing to do.
Jesse, you described yourself as a self-defense nerd earlier, and I know you wanted to talk a little about the self-defense seminars. So you guys both do self-defense seminars. D'Juan's done one at my gym, two, maybe three at my gym now that I think about it. Like over the years, we gotta get that into double digits soon. But
yes, yes.
yeah. But did you have any self-defense specific stuff you wanted to discuss with D'Juan?
So, I there was something that just kind of occurred to me that kind of dovetails into Steve's original question a few minutes ago, and something D'Juan said about Steve. You mentioned that a lot of people sell these self-defense seminars by conjuring up this kind of imaginary boogeyman.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I've really noticed, and D'Juan, you said something about this in a different topic, that even people within that population carry those same kind of norms, or they're wired the same way. So when we have groups of women come in, I didn't sell the boogeyman, but they bring the boogeyman with them.
Mm-hmm.
And, honestly, when we have a few hours with these people, and I'll tell them, I'm like, I can teach you some stuff, but if I teach you a move, you won't remember it in the morning. But you know what you will remember? You will remember when I tell you that the boogeyman, for the most part, doesn't exist, and that the person that's going to try to hurt you is already in your life. And just having that psychological preparation, I think, is so valuable. Because a lot of people, I don't feel like, really know that. Or if they have heard it, they haven't internalized it. Because thinking about that is really hard. I mean, it makes my stomach turn thinking about it. For all the people in my life that, have predators, humans that prey on others. They're not monsters, they're people. So I thought that was interesting, and I felt like it was worth mentioning for sure.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you mentioned that. I think that, same thing. If I'm teaching a seminar, something that I try to focus on, like you said, that people are not, unless they continue to train, they're not going to remember a lot of the techniques. But what I like to do is kind of use the seminars as like an incubator to get some of these conversations started. But what I can't do is go to people like, hey, y'all, let's talk about intimate partner violence. Let's talk about consent. Y'all, when I was in high school, I had never heard of consent in the way. I mean, there's certain things right? But there was never like a topic of consent discussed. You know what I mean? Also, when we think of like boundary setting, when I'm teaching seminars, something I always try to talk about setting the tone. Like, what one defines self-defense, what it is, what it's not. You know, and also boundary setting. You know, and when we set a boundary, I tell people it doesn't mean that this person is not going to, you know, uh, they're going to respect the boundary. But what it does mean is if if they're a habitual line stepper, as we say, then now we don't have to wonder what level to take it to. I tell people do not prioritize, you know, someone else's feelings over your own safety. Now, be politically correct and say people have, but we'll keep it real on here. Women, people, or people who are not men, most often have been socialized to prioritize men's feelings over their own safety. So let's say worst case scenario, someone does have, good intentions and I hurt their feelings. So what? I'm sorry. Best case scenario, worst case scenario, their intentions are wrong, and now I'm hemmed up. Like the later we, just like jujitsu, the later we wait to respond to a threat, the less options we have. Right? From a jujitsu perspective, we got the early defense, which is just don't get, hey, just follow these rules to a degree, and then you have the escape, and then you have the oh damn, and the oh damn it's a lower, it's less likely to work. So it's the same thing in terms of situational awareness and boundary setting. For example, I use sometimes when teaching seminars, like, okay, if I'm at a gas station, y'all know they got these gas stations. You know, the gas station could be closed, but people can still use the pump. They can use their car in the pump. I'm at one. Let's say I'm some smaller person, and then this is some other person's at 12, and they're walking over to me and they're asking me, hey, what time is it? Whatever they're saying, joke is freaking 2 a.m. Like, why are you coming to me saying something? But I feel weird, right? I'm like, oh shit, I don't want to come off this way. I don't want to. So I wait. By the time they're, my options are significantly limited by the time they're up on me, right? But if at the point that I see them walking over, they ask me something about him, I'm like, hey, stop. They take another step. Now I have enough time to get in the car, to drive off, to lock the door, to do whatever. So this, again, like I said, let's say the person intentions are good. Maybe this joker, for whatever damn reason, wants to be a weirdo and ask me, but what, like I said, you hurt their feelings. So what? So we
You're never going to see that person again.
Exactly. So we see this often, in instances of coercive, someone trying to coerce someone, about, let's say someone's at the club and they're like, oh, they're grabbing someone's arm. Hey, well, why you got to be like that? Why you got to act like that? Like trying to almost use the societal norms against the person. Now making them think, hey, you responding to my bullshit is the real problem, not the bullshit that I'm doing. You see what I'm saying? And this is what people who want some predatory shit want to do. They want to kind of blur the lines, which is why, when teaching self-defense seminars, we got to talk about this boundary setting and tell people the only thing that differentiates a request from a command is your tone and your posture. You know what I mean? You have autonomy. You don't need nobody's permission to do shit. You set this boundary. That's just what it is. It also signals to the person like, hey, motherfucker, I'm not about to just damn roll over for you. It's gonna be a fight. It's gonna be some resistance. And it also, when you set that firm boundary, and like I said, the voice and posture, being the first line of defense, it kind of signals to other people that, hey, we're not joking. Sometimes you see adults, for something's going on, you're like, hey, what's going on in this? How many times we heard, oh, they're just playing. They're just playing. Right? But when someone hears someone yell, stop, get off me, back up, then it's obvious, right? And no one wants to be average, wants to be not only a creepo, but more important, they don't want to be seen, as a creepo. So we got to kind of play on all these social tools. These jokers do it. They'll play on every jacked up societal norm they can. So people have to find ways to, to do that as well.
Yeah, that's something we talk with groups a lot about. Women's groups in particular. I should have had Shelby should probably be sitting here instead of me because she's real great about talking about it. She'll tell people you are under no fucking obligation to be nice to anybody.
That's it.
It doesn't matter if people think you're a bitch. That is irrelevant. Your only job is to get home safe every night.
That's it.
Everybody could think you're a bitch. Who cares?
And the wild thing is, culturally, what is a bitch anyway, right?
Right.
When you hear me, like, when people say that, what do they mean? Somebody who's not complying. Somebody who's not. Why should I comply? I don't fucking know you. Don't get me started. I'm trying to.
Yeah, exactly right. No.
We gotta go.
But this actually gets to.
But we're here.
This is an issue. It actually dovetails an issue I want to discuss with you guys. And Jesse, one of the things I think is cool about you and Shelby having the gym together is I think the messenger matters. And so to talk, like, I think having a man and a woman, I think having different messengers that are both communicating these important messages, these messages about consent, about boundary setting, about non-compliance, about about not prioritizing someone else's comfort over your safety. And I think we all in this room know that, like, there's a certain demographic of people, because fight sports skews male, it skews young, it skews very aggressive, that will not listen to someone unless they think that person can beat them up. I don't know, and it's a sad thing, but it's a very real thing. And that's why I think, like, we need to cultivate more messengers to get at people earlier to help them internalize these messages.
Yeah, I agree. I think, when something is like it's all in how we socialize with people, like a collective of like agreed upon values is a very powerful thing. Nobody wants to be a social leper. You know what I mean? If people act like, oh, I don't care what anybody thinks about. Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. No one wants, to be on the outs in there. So if it's a social group that they desire to fit in, I'll say this, right? So we just got to make that the norm, and we also gotta I want to be intentional with my words. I think sometimes warriors for justice, I'll say, there's just like a culture of I'm really trying to be intentional with these words. We just, I think sometimes the warrior aspect is lost. There's almost this assumption that like discipline and structure and they are inherently bad because or powerful, because we've seen power used as a tool to harm, to oppress so much. So we're almost like, oh well, this is just the prerogative of people who do bad shit. We'll just, you know what I mean? Or you see, or you ever see situations where we allow people who do harm to benefit from standards that they don't even hold themselves to, right? It would always like, matter of fact, I know I'm talking in abstract ways, but real quick example, like, like with superheroes, Batman's an obvious example. So many times this Joker, he could have killed Joker. I was
Yeah.
about to say the Joker, but yeah, this Joker could have killed Joker. You know what I mean? And but he saves him. And in saving him, you're putting the potential every time this weasel is gonna do some jacked up shit in the future. You know what I mean? He's enabled, in a way. Now I'm not saying like we should be killing jokers, but what I'm saying is like sometimes we're like, well, we don't want to be what they are. We could never be what they are. We don't, you're not in any danger of becoming what they are. But to the extent that people are allowed to keep doing
Yeah.
the harmful things that they do
Yeah.
because they know will invite them back in, you know what I mean? So yeah, that type of accountability is important too. I really think that kind of instilling this like, yo, this is a fight. We are fighting for not only equity and humanity, but honestly, at this point, this planet's capacity to sustain human life. Because there's people out here who really just don't give a damn.
I think this is a really important observation because, and I have an insight about it that's sort of related to what we were talking about earlier in terms of accountability and responsibility. I think a big part of why I think so many people whose values are in the right place, whose hearts are in the right place, who are pro justice, I think a lot of them are afraid of power for some of the reasons that you cited, D'Juan, right?
You said it.
Right. I think they're afraid of power, and the other, and part of the reason I think they are is power, not to go back to comic books, but with great power comes great responsibility. And it's easy to be a critic. It's easy to just say like, oh, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. But if you're ever going to make real change, you have to be willing to wield power.
Got to step into the arena.
Yeah. Once you have it, you have the responsibility to wield it. And I think we all have to get more comfortable with that.
That you said that. And I think about it like, power can be used as a shield as well as a sword. You know what I mean? And I think, yeah, thinking about it like that really, it really helps me. You know what I mean?
And I know I am going to make the third comic book reference in 2 minutes. Captain America's weapon is a shield, right? Whether it's
That's it.
Rogers or Sam Wilson, his weapon is a shield. I think that's a really powerful symbol.
We're not going to talk about John Walker like he just doesn't exist.
Hey, yeah. U.S. agent doesn't count. Doesn't.
I don't think we should pattern our ethics after a U.S. agent. That's not the approach I would suggest.
I'm pro Captain Carter too. I love the alternative universe, Captain America.
D'Juan, let me ask you something, because it's something I deal with a lot when I'm running sessions. And it goes a little bit, I think, back into the victim blaming stuff a little bit. I feel like a lot of times, especially when we're talking to women, and especially when it's men in the front of the room talking to women in these kind of self-defense settings, we tend to ask a lot of them in terms of making such deep behavior changes that it almost seems like we're asking for deep personality changes. Like, hey, if you start acting different than how you actually are, you won't get hurt. And that has always sat wrong with me. To the point where I've gotten to the point that I'm talking about, as opposed to thinking about changing deep personality changes, thinking about your appetite for risk and risk mitigation and some of these other things that they do have power over that don't require them to all of a sudden be more gregarious and be more this and be more forthright and assertive and all these things that just may not be wired into them, especially when they're, 16, 17, 18, going into college, and we're telling them about how, they need to change their personality so they don't get raped. It's always seemed crazy to me.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
Yeah, great question. Well, two things. One, I at this point, and I don't think I ever will again. I don't teach like women's only seminars. Anytime I teach a seminar, anybody can show up in the body or the identity that they're in. I did teach, the last time I taught one was in 2017 in Senegal, but it was these women practiced Islam, so it could only be
What it was.
women there. But and I've also been asked why, and I think we just don't live in a world where only women exist. You know what I mean? So, and I also, there's some real, I've found that there's some real accountability when there's these kind of intergender seminars, because when people a lot of times hear um women talk about some of the things that they face. Matter of fact, I'll give you an example. Taught a seminar 2 months ago. Um, this couple, they might have been married 10 years. The wife, she was talking about some situation that happened, and what she did, and her husband is like, baby, when did that happen? Years ago? She was like, no, that was 2 weeks ago. He was like, what? Babe, why didn't you tell me? And it wasn't something so egregious. It was, and she was like, that was just, and see,
That's
her
every
face was
day.
like, that's it, right.
That's
And
every
this
day.
guy, yes, and this guy, he looked like, he just couldn't believe. It was like, wait, what? I live with you, and I don't. You know what I'm saying? So there is some real accountability for some people. Understand, like, yo, there are people out here who don't. And I think, like, cowardice aside, there is a segment of society that just doesn't comprehend what some members of our society like go through, and live by. So they feel that the extremes are exaggerations, or you know what I mean. And there's a lot to that, but like I said, so I teach. I do prefer teaching them in a group, but I also like talking about situations. For me, I like talking about situations as opposed to um actions. If I'm talking about actions, then I'm talking about our like creating a toolkit. Again, we talk about situational awareness, and that's just like safety and security protocol. Hey, you know what I mean? If I'm in this type of space, I'm looking out for this. I'm going somewhere as a group. If we go out with a group, and let's say young people going out as a group. This is who we came with. This is who we leaving with. I don't care if you meet some guy, some girl, somebody they pretty, they cute, whatever. We're going home as a group. You want to meet them tomorrow after y'all set up a date? Fine. But tonight we taking our ass home. We're gonna call. I tell people they have a lot of these I don't know what they call, but how you can share your location with somebody, but they have a lot of these groups where like a group of people, share their locations. All these different types of tips. Let's say somebody's getting in an Uber, and they're just, even if they're not on the phone with somebody, they kind of like, oh yeah, I'm about 5 minutes away. Yeah, I'm pulling up. I'll be in a black car. Okay, all right, talk soon. Peace. Whether somebody's on the phone or not. There's a lot of different things. So thinking of it as like creating a toolkit as opposed to like what someone does wrong. You know what I mean? I don't like, there's no difference than positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. So instead of talking about what someone's doing wrong or even not doing, let's talk about here's some things to do. And when I'm talking in groups, I like to say we. I like to say we, even if it's something that like may not really apply to me in the same way. I do like to say we. It just feels good. It just feels welcoming. Team, family, just kind of finding ways to kind of pull people in. And on that accountability piece, is really, really important. And then also, yeah, I think also teaching something from seminars and somebody like, hey, this is just, we just a group of homies. chopping it up. We're gonna have this family discussion because it's a real intimate thing. And I also tell people another thing that's very important. I should have mentioned this earlier is consent. Asking for consent when doing certain techniques. So I'll go over like, hey, you know, when we're doing a one hand choke escape, this could be likely in this situation where there's some type of power dynamic. Someone said, hey, you better not do this again, or if you do this again, I'm gonna do this. It's not that this person is not dangerous, but usually if it's one hand, this person is not trying to, you know, choke someone out. There's
Unless
usually
it's
some
Rob
type of threat.
Bernanke, then he's definitely trying to choke you out with one hand. Jiu-Jitsu tangent. Have you seen that? The roadhouse choke, the one-handed choke. Jesus,
I saw that.
it sucks.
Oh man.
Have
Yeah,
I
I
seen
saw
it?
some.
Do I use it on a daily basis? Yes, I do.
But that's a perfect example of and you know, I would love to actually do a whole conversation about kind of the art of consent in martial arts, because that's a perfect example. I mean, jiu-jitsu, once you kind of get used to it, it's actually a pretty soft combat sport, right? I mean, you can have a real laid back role in jiu-jitsu if you trust the other person, but there's some gnarly stuff that can happen. And I mean, if someone is a trauma survivor and you roadhouse them, right? I mean, you can do some psychological damage to them. And in fact, I believe that's part of why Rob does that in tournaments, is because it's so traumatizing to people. They don't expect for someone to just goozle them and choke them with one hand like that. That's something you only see in horror movies and in abuse situations. And it's a perfect example of why in the martial arts, it's so important to be on the same page with your partner. I've talked about this before. You have to have compatible intent with your partner. You have to be playing by the same rules as to what's okay and what's not okay. Pretty much every horror story I've heard about martial arts training stems from a mismatch in intent. One person thought they were having a casual role and the other person thought it was an MMA fight. And that is a huge problem. And that's one of the reasons why you hear all of these terrible training stories in jiu-jitsu and other martial arts.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I have a terrible training story that I have to share that has a very happy ending, because often these are the situations that I find myself having to ask people to leave the most over, is folks who just can't get on that same page with, finding the right vibe for their role. And so we had the story ends happily because both of these people are still happily training at my academy against all odds. We had a tiny woman join the gym, and you get to know people slowly, right? Sometimes you get to know who they are immediately. Some people are more introverted, but you know somebody better in year 3 than you do in month 1, right? And so, this young woman turned out to be a real scrapper, but I didn't know her at the time. I just saw a 110-pound lady, and one of our recently promoted male blue belts, who was in the military, who's big and strong. I look over, and he has wrapped her ponytail around her neck and is choking her with her own ponytail.
God.
And I'm going to pull out my phone in a second to show you guys something, because I run over, and D'Juan knows me. He's seen me in a lot of environments. I'm not an aggressive rush to judgment guy, but I'm running over with like all these words right here in my throat about if you ever, and I will. And I get over and she is laughing. And I'm like, and I talk to the guy and I'm like, don't you know not to do that? He's like, I thought I'd try it. And I was like, I was so mad at him. And she was like, don't get mad at him. And I was like, no, I'm going to be mad at him. I'm glad you're not mad at him. That's great. But and to this day, and I'm going to black out his first name. I'm not, can I show you this? Anyway, his name in my phone is Cameron Hair Guy. This happened 2 years ago. That will always be his last name to me. And like I said, this turned out to be an arrangement where like I was not privy to like the particular contextual and consent context of their role. I just saw a dude doing a thing that I was like, now who in their right mind would think that was okay to do to someone? But
you know, and this is not to say that we don't have a long way to go, but consent is foundational to jiu-jitsu, right? The slap and bump is consent, right? We don't start roles before that happens.
Right.
That's not to say that we can't start building better layers of consent on top of that, but there's context for it, in my opinion. I think we could start doing a better job about it, but it is baked in to the sport, to the game.
Yeah, I agree. I think and to just one more point on the seminar tip and consent. So even when people are coming to the self-defense seminars, it's an assumption that, okay, we're all here for the same thing. But even within a space like that, where it's clearly an agreed upon goal, getting people used to asking for consent and expecting consent is important. So if I'm teaching a 1-hand choke escape or 2-hand choke escape, I'll say, okay, all right, before we start, ask your partner, okay, can I grab your neck? And and the guy, we're doing this drill, and it feels weird to people. It feels weird because it's like, well, shit, you know what I mean? It kind of, but that's also important. I also think that, you know, as a male, teaching a self-defense seminar, understanding that there are going to be a lot of assumptions. There's assumptions sometimes already. My body in itself could be triggering to someone when I'm explaining certain things, because people are coming with their experiences, and so trying to be aware of the language that I use, the words that I say. To be honest, y'all, we talking about it on this podcast, but I don't even, if I'm teaching a seminar, I don't use the word rape. I say, like, sexual violence, or not that there's anything, like, I'm not telling people to take that out of their vocabulary, but just I'm trying to, and even if there's something that I think is perfectly fine that I would say, because it keeps me from saying 20 words. If I'm in that seminar, I'll say the 20 words. I'll say that I want to be as clear with the language as possible. And also, another thing that I think is important is kind of doing some table setting. Like, we get there and say, hey, we're going to make this space as safe, as we can, be within the context of a world that we know is not safe. So if something can be taken two ways, I want to take it the best way. And over this, and how if would I do that the same way if I was in a different body? I don't know. But I do it, and it seems to work well, and people are receptive to it.
On the topic of consent, one of the coolest drills that I've stolen from Cody Malte, who D'Juan teaches at a gym called Elevate MMA in Durham, North Carolina. We've both trained with Cody for many years. Is he has people actually practice saying no to roles, like, because it reinforces the notion that you're allowed to say no and you don't have to give them a reason. And it's a thing that I had never seen anybody do that before, because I always communicate that message, like, hey, it's all right to say no. But it's one thing to, just like it's one thing to see a technique, it's another thing to drill it. And he actually occasionally has folks do that, which I think is really cool.
I'd like to maybe expand on this thing, because there's always going to be pushback once we start talking about stuff like consent, right? Because there are a surprisingly large contingent of wannabe alpha males who operate in the jiu-jitsu space, and to them, jiu-jitsu is all wannabe. Yeah, to
They
them,
are.
Yeah.
but to them, jiu-jitsu is all about toughness and violence, and iron sharpens iron. And often when I have discussions like this, I get people commenting and saying things like, this kind of stuff is watering down and weakening the sport. And when we make it all about consent and touchy-feely stuff, we're taking away the razor's edge, and we're accommodating the weak and vulnerable, and we're all going to suffer because now we're not being real warriors. We're cosplaying as it to accommodate for people's wimpy feelings. And I'm tired of dealing with that comment. So, D'Juan, I'd love you to tee off on these people if you don't mind.
Yeah, a couple of things, right? As a a retired professional fighter, it wasn't until I retired that I really, because it's so baked into the culture, that I would turn down a role. Now, I don't do it as often as I should. It's very rare that I do. But I got two things on that. One, it's important because some people, like, at the point that you realize someone is they're more focused on tapping you, and they would even be willing to hurt you to do that. We're in the gym to get better, to train. But I'll tell you something, like, I want to talk about that, but a tool that helps me. Let's say someone's doing something that's just not right. I'll just ask them, like, what are we doing? What are we doing? That seems to work. It works real well. Like, I haven't used it in a couple months. The last time I used it, it was somebody who was, being kind of silly. You going to London, Jeff. So some of my people in London say cheeky. He was being a little cheeky, and I'm like, what are we doing? And he looked so confused. He's like, oh, my bad. And of course, so this guy, pro fighter, he's a purple belt, small joint manipulation. I'm on his back. this joker's grabbing two of my fingers. You a damn purple belt, dog. You know what I'm saying? You don't know. So like, what are we doing? That seems to help me, and it always kind of deflates the. It's like holding the mirror up, right? Instead of me saying the thing, I'm asking like, what are we doing? But in terms of turning roles down, well, no, I want to get to these jokers that are like, oh, we're supposed to be warriors. You mean the same cowards that will allow someone to be harmed in the gym, and then when told about it, not say anything, not hold someone accountable? Like, at what point is like warrior? Well, Jeff, you may notice. Will we say warriorhood or warriorship? You know, let me ask the professor. We say warriorhood or warriorship?
Warriorhood. Let's go with warriorhood.
Okay. So at what point of warriorhood is like protecting not an essential element of that? Because you're a warrior, right? You're not a soldier. You're not a soldier who just following orders. You're a warrior. You know what I mean? So where's the protective element? I thought that was like an essential component of you fighting for somebody. You're fighting for something. So they can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways. I also think that there are gyms that are just, it starts from the top down. The culture is going to develop in the gym. And speaking of Cody, it's something I love. Like, if he feels like somebody's just a problem, like, we ain't trying to change nobody. Go. We don't need you. You're not a good fit at this point. And I think if more gyms had that mentality, like, look, you know what? You're just not a good fit. And then I think, society, we have this thing where we almost feel like I need to be able to prove to this person or give them a good reason why. Like, nah. Well, why can't I just like, you know what? Just not a good fit. That's okay. My daughter, who is supposed to be home right now and is not home, and it's like it's past 10, but she has this thing where she almost like, let's say I know she does something wrong and I say something to her about it. It's almost like in her mind, if I don't prove to her how I know she did it, then it's like it's not real. Now, look, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You did it. You're on punishment. Like, I know you did it. Right? I don't have to prove to you how I know. Not only do I know, you know. You know what I mean? And I know you know. So I think sometimes when people was like, well, what am I doing? You ever have situations where, let's say, a student comes to you and they're like, yo, this person's being kind of weird. Well, what are they doing? And they're explaining it, and you know what it is, but it's hard to kind of, put in the words. So the person holding them kind of like, well, what did I do? It's unspoken. Well, tell me exactly what I did. And like, oh, if you can't say it in this way, look, nah, you're just not a good fit. And I think we got to be okay doing that. And all these, it's always funny when people say these alpha males and warriors. Like, what? Again, what are we doing? What are we doing? This is a sport. We want to get in shape. We want to learn to protect ourselves. Again, eventually you stay on it long enough, you want to graduate, start seeing yourself as a martial artist. I can use this as a liberatory tool. Outside of that, like, what are we doing? If you want to fight, go fight. Right here, we're doing jiu-jitsu. And again, as they progress on their fighting journey, they'll get out of that quick too. They'll start realizing like, hey, there's no, skill in fighting does not mean inherently harder or rougher or even tougher. I know plenty of skilled fighters who just, someone can say they may not have heart, but it doesn't matter. You're not going to get them to the point. If you don't got the skill to get them to that breaking point, then it doesn't matter.
Most of the really good fighters that I know, the actual elite people who do this for a living, they're like the softest, most passive roles ever.
Yes.
Because they're there to learn, not to win. And they also understand there's consequences to going way too aggressive and everyone gets injured and now they can't do their fucking job, right? So often I find the people who are really the actual warriors, they're often the softest and most gentle people because they understand the consequences of violence. So I think that's very well said. Yep. I have a question. Before maybe we tie this up, does anyone else have any other questions for D'Juan? Because I had something I wanted to put in front of him that I think you guys might like.
I've had it. You go for it.
Okay. Well, D'Juan, we've started doing this thing here where we read the comments, and we get some good ones. I've got a comment here that I would love to know. Would you like to react to something that someone dropped in our comments?
Yeah, anything.
Okay, you're going to appreciate it. Let me just dig this up for you here. Just give me 1 second to find this. It's somewhere in my vault.
Is this going to get me review bombed again?
I think it might. Okay, here you go. So we had a guy who commented on one of our videos, and basically he said that the solution to women being assaulted in jiu-jitsu is to remove women from the gym so that it's a man's only space. He said, like, this is a problem with women. Got to get them out of here. I nuked his comments. He was very mad about that. He came back, and this is what he said. This channel, and this is my alpha voice, by the way, this channel is what is wrong with BJJ. I brought up in 2 comments how women come into the gym looking for a man and prey on men. My comments were deleted. Why? I have seen single women ruining marriages. I have been in the scene for 25 years. My comments
this is my guy.
I think he might be your guy. My
This is
comments
my guy.
are respectful, and yet no proper discourse on the topic, pushing a narrative, not looking at facts. This channel and this mindset is what is wrong with BJJ. D'Juan, I would love to know. We've only known each other for about an hour or so, but I would love to know, do you feel that we are ruining jiu-jitsu here?
Well, I'll say this. Of course I don't. But to his comment, if I were you, you're right. You're right. It is us. We are what's wrong with jiu-jitsu. Before our channel, there was nothing wrong with jiu-jitsu. Now that it exists, jiu-jitsu was all wrong. Yo, this is a perfect example. Remember when I was talking about these jokers want you to explain away just how dumb? But it's like, Jeff, there was this quote, man. You got to help with it. It was a science fiction writer. I think his name was Robert Heinlein.
Yes.
And he was talking about how, I'm about to jack this quote up, but he basically was talking about how, we're in a time where we're in a culture of like anti-intellectualism, where people think that their ignorance, they have just
Your ignorance is my knowledge.
Yes. And also, the quote is just so much more hot fire than that. I just jacked it up. It was super. But either way, like his comment, it's like it's its own sad rebuttal. Like it's its own. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like why should you think of everyone on this call right now, and we're connecting our minds in response to this dribble. Like I don't even want to legitimize. It's so beneath all of us. Like, dude, what are you doing? But I also know, because unfortunately we just built like that, right? Like with this empathy, this guy, he's struggling with something. And I ain't in no position to psychoanalyze somebody, but what I can say is he's clearly coming with some baggage, and in his own words, you know what I mean? I've been dealing with this, and I've been seeing this. Whatever you've been dealing with, he's bringing to this discussion, and it's just, I don't know, silly.
I know we can't insert a meme into the video, but if we could, me and our buddy Harold cornered D'Juan for a fight that he had up in British Columbia, and there's a photo of us backstage, and we're all looking at the camera. You know the picture I'm talking about, and we're all looking at the camera just like this. And I forget even the context of what happened, but it just looks like all of us are thinking, "Come on, what are we doing?"
Yeah,
and,
what are we doing?
One of the most memeable pictures ever.
No, I love that. I love that picture, man. Great, real quick, man. I remember when COVID, like early 2020, when it was first blowing up, and people were like, one of the comments like, "Hey, man, you think Corona's real, or should I go out?" And I remember putting like how we look at people who ask dumb questions like this, and I put that picture there. But no, man, this guy, I think that I really think that we don't ever need to feel bad about just like feeling how we feel and not needing to explain certain things. It's the exact same thing I was talking about my daughter. She's doing the shit that she's doing, and she's like, "Prove to me that I'm doing." He's like, "Well, why can't we have intelligent discourse?" I said, "And you can say some dumb shit, and you can say something dumb as nice as you want to say it. It's still dumb as hell. I don't care how nicely you put it. How it doesn't make any sense. It's silly, and I mean, it's like me speaking the Queen's English and saying, "To thine, fuck thyself." Like, yeah, I said it in this way, but it's some rude, disrespectful shit. So, dude, like, he's like, I was even nice about it. Like, I put like intelligent. Like, no. If you want to waste someone's time, you know what it is, man. I also think that sometimes having access to, because he watches the channel, he probably respects the dialogue. Having access to someone like y'all is it's the highlight of his day if he was to get a response, and it's hurting him more by you not doing that. So I think you should just like let him just stay with the pain, and they're not responding to me. I think I think a little bit of that.
That's perfectly said. You've been really generous with your time. I want to ask one last final question,
Yeah.
which is related. And then maybe you could sum up, like, if people want to get in touch with you and book seminars and things like that. But like, how many countries have you taught self-defense seminars in?
I'll name them because I don't got off hand, but obviously, America, Canada, Uganda, Nigeria, Benin, Senegal, um, uh, Kenya, and the Gambia. So yeah, I've been around a bit, and I also say this. I think I was about to touch on it earlier, but got carried away a bit. I had to learn that like context matters, and I had to prioritize gearing the seminars to to make it culturally relevant. And I'll also say this, right? Because Jesse, you made a great point when you were talking about sometimes people who are members of in the press community, they can also still bring some of that stuff. You're talking about women at this point, but I'll say this too, as a black man living in America, you know, yeah, a lot of privilege that comes with that, like going to these African countries and doing these works. And I know, we've all heard the complex of of a white savior, but regardless of what, I mean, there's some blue passport privilege, right? I've been in situations where I'm in another place, and clearly I look like everyone else, but I'm noticing that I'm treated in a different way, not because of my ability, not because I'm, how I, my knowledge before I got there, because of where I was from, or attributed certain, like, I guess we'll call it like lateral expertise. So I know about this, but I don't know shit about this, but there's this assumption that I know about this because you see what I'm saying? So kind of grappling with that, and like people offering things and giving me things, and they realize like, oh, I don't really deserve it. I'm kind of taking advantage of this if I was to. Anyway, a lot of hard lessons, right? Lot of hard lessons. Yeah, still learning, but definitely, a lot of hard lessons came with that, and realized like, okay, sometimes it's better to focus on, like, I think one of you mentioned the messenger, right? I can know something, but does this need to come from me? I can do more work for this community by teaching people and supporting them to teach, or doing something behind the scenes. No different than, like, I have a really good friend who does a lot of work with the trans community here in Durham, and they would ask me to teach, at the seminars, but we did a lot of work behind the scenes because it was much better for them to be the one teaching. So there's not this concept that someone outside of this identity that they had needed to do this. And if I was really prioritizing the work, that's what it is. Sometimes it's taking a step back. Sometimes it might be dropping some paper on something behind the scenes. There's a lot of different ways to support. It's not having your ass on Front Street all the time, being, the one who, like I said earlier, is not as bad as society allows you to be. So now you a damn hero.
What a great point.
Absolutely. And you've taken those lessons. You've done a lot of great stuff in the world, and I think I'm grateful for you, and I'm glad to know you, and I'm really grateful. Yeah, really grateful you came on the podcast.
Appreciate you, man. And Steve and Jesse, man, it was great meeting y'all, man.
This is awesome.
Great.
Thanks so much, D'Juan. This is amazing.
Yes, indeed. All right, y'all, be safe. And yeah, hit me up anytime. I'm all the way down, man. Like, y'all know Jeff's my man. I love him to life. Anything you ever need, just whatever. I'll let you.
I'll holler at you soon. We'll catch up.
All right, y'all. Peace.
Peace.